Hey, this is Dave from Metal Mobile. The biggest mistake I've seen new app developers make is trying to do too much in too short a period of time. When people have a concept for a new app, they always see it as it exists kind of at the end of year one, end of year two, with a big user base and a big community involved in it. But the fact is that when you're building an app, you really have to think about those first users, those first 100 users, those first 1,000 users, and really teaching them how to use something that they've never used before. So to do that, you have to focus on as small of a piece of technology as you can possibly create in order to communicate what it is that you're trying to do. And then release that to a group of people, get feedback, understand how they're using it, and then add features over time in both a combination of how you envision the product to grow and as your growing user base directs you to grow the product. I've seen clients that have mapped out a 2-year roadmap in the first 3 months and then spend a year trying to build that 2-year roadmap, and by the time they get to the end of it, the market has changed, the product has changed, and you miss the mark. As opposed to, we've worked with other clients where we roll up our sleeves, we focus in on a very core set of functionality to start, we build it, we get it out, we have people testing it, and people using it, we fine tune it, we refine it, and over years they grow into really substantial pieces of tech. A lot of people ask us, how do you get an app made? How do you go from I have an idea for an app to I have an app? And frankly, there's lots of different ways. There's lots of different companies you can work with. There's lots of different partnerships you can create. In broad strokes, I think there's a few different buckets though of how you can approach it. The first, what I see a lot of people do is they look overseas for development. There's a reason for that. Overseas development can be a lot cheaper. And when you're building your first app, of course, you want to try and save money. The challenges with building overseas, however, is that if technology isn't your first language and their language isn't your first language, there's a lot of opportunity for confusion and there's a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong. So projects that realistically should take 3 to 6 months end up taking 9 to 12 months. They're things that never end up getting built the way you always envisioned it. And it's not necessarily because of bad development as much as it is communications. And communications is obviously vital to any endeavor. Building an app, you really need your team to communicate. So you can also look to bring somebody in who can kind of work for you, an independent developer, a solo person who maybe has built a couple of apps, has an app in the store, and they're going to try and take on your challenge. Again, this is something that can work, but what we've seen over time is that if you're going this direction, invariably every project that you begin is going to have some sort of an unknown roadblock that you didn't know you were going to hit. And there's a lot of independent developers who are out there who have a great network of people they can reach out to and ask questions, and I think that's how a lot of that development happens. But there's also a lot of people who take on projects not necessarily knowing all of the unknowns that they're going to find. And we've seen a lot of projects brought our way into what we lovingly call the metal repair shop, where projects have been built, they get to a certain phase, and then for whatever reason, usually the small team behind it can't get it over a certain roadblock. So if your idea is simple, if it's something that's been done before and you're working with someone who knows how to build it, it's not a bad idea. But if you really are trying to build something scalable, or you're trying to build something new, working with a few solo people isn't always the best way to go. A subset of that is you can also hire your own team, bring them in-house, and take those same people and grow out your technology team that way. If you have the budget and the time for that, it's not a bad way to go. Over time, the team starts to get to know each other, and you can build a really solid piece of technology around a group of core people. On the flip side, if you've never hired engineers before, and you've never hired technology folks before, and you've never managed a technology team before, it can also be a dangerous thing because not casting any dispersions on anyone, but it's easy to hide in a technology team for months and not necessarily know what you're doing. And so sometimes you can go out and hire a great team, it can look like everything's working, and then all of a sudden, one day, nothing is working, and you really can't figure out where that's coming from. And then the last way is you can go out and you can hire a development shop like ourselves. Like, there's great development shops out there. We're not the only ones. But I think when you work with a development shop like us, what you're going to get is you'll get a cross-functional team so that we've seen all the different things from different angles before. And ideally, a partner is going to give you a dedicated product lead who can speak your language, understand your goals, and then translate those goals and those needs to a larger team who can execute. So a lot of people will say, oh, apps are just a fad. Apps are not needed. Apps are, we don't want to just make an app for the sake of making an app. And I completely agree with that. You shouldn't make an app just for the sake of making an app. The way that I would advise any company to make an app is to look at what apps are great at. And in my mind, apps are great at building a relationship. They're great at building a relationship between the company and its customers. They're great at building a relationship between drivers and people who are looking for rides. They're great at building relationships between restaurants and people who are looking for food. They're great at building relationships between salespeople who are out on the road and home base that needs to communicate with them. So really the question for your company is who are your constituencies? Who are the people within your organization, either internally, on your sales force, within your customers, core customers, potential customers? Who are the folks out there that you really want to strengthen your relationship with? And then once you identify them, it's a lot easier to say, okay, well then what would an app do that would strengthen that relationship? How can we make their life easier? How can we provide our services easier? How can we remind them about that special thing we provide for them in a way that's maybe a little bit unexpected? So what does your company need for an app? Really starts with the question of who are you trying to build a relationship with. It's a great question. So why is marketing an app different from marketing a website? I think, first of all, websites, granted in the grand history, haven't been around forever, but they have been around for a really long time. And there's a whole lot of web tech that's available and has been available for a long time to enable someone who's driving people to the web to track and monitor and see what their users are doing and how their marketing dollars are being spent. Really, that area on the mobile side was very nascent for a long period of time. It's really only been in the last couple of years that we've been able to track what's happening in terms of marketing and how the marketing dollars are spent, and then those users are funneling into the apps and moving through the apps. And what we do have at our disposal in app marketing is a whole bunch of really powerful tools that we can use to plug into an application, embed SDKs into the app itself, and then literally see how our dollars are being spent and what that's doing in terms of apps, in terms of users downloading and ending up right inside the application. And then that in and of itself is exciting, but we can also go beyond that because we can start to understand lifetime value of a user as is relative to the money we're spending in advertising, because we can literally look at segments of users and say this group of users we spent X on in order to drive in, and now they're generating Y revenue over time, whereas these users we spent M on and they're generating N revenue over time. So it's really evolved a lot, and I think there are certainly a lot of similarities between web marketing and mobile marketing, but the biggest difference is just the tool sets that are available and how we can use them. Right, so the question, what are the best practices for mobile safety, security, and data integrity? And really, there are a few different principles which we ascribe to. I think every developer has to decide for themselves how are they going to approach data. But it's really important to think of it from two perspectives and come to your decision. You have to think about it as an innovator and as someone who knows that availability of data and access to data is what helps drive this industry forward. And all technologists and people who build tech think about that. And then you also have to think about it as a human being and as a parent and as a family member. And would you want people to have this information about you or about your mom or about your family? So there's some guidelines that we follow that I think are just helpful to look at. The first is the idea of openness and transparency. You have to let people know when you're collecting their data. You have to let them know what data you're collecting. It's very obvious if you have a data form where it's name, address, phone number, people know that you're collecting that information about them. But if you're going to be collecting their location, if you're going to be collecting other information, it's just really important to tell people this is what we're collecting and be honest about it. You can also explain to them why you're collecting that data. I think it's important and it helps people understand we're capturing your location data because we're making recommendations to you in places where you frequent. Obviously, every developer needs to find where on that line and how much information and how much insight they want to put out there. But at the end of the day, it's really important to just be transparent with how you're collecting it and what you're doing with it. The second area, the second big bucket is security and data integrity. you have to protect somebody's data. If you're going to capture their credit card information, if you're going to capture their home address, if you're going to capture any information about them and store it, you really do need to make sure you're holding it in a way that is secure, in a way that follows important protocols, in a way that is just protecting the information, just like you would want your information protected. And the third area is the concept of responsible data stewardship. And that's the idea that really, as the person who holds the data, you should be looking after the best interests of everybody, your customers, your clients, people whose data you've collected. It goes beyond security. It goes to really, what are you going to do with that data long term, and how do you plan on using it? I think that for anybody who's interested in learning more about the area of security and privacy of data, a great resource is the Developers Trust Alliance, and that's the developerstrustalliance.org. So what am I most excited about in mobile? I think what gets me most excited, first of all, we've been building apps for 10 years, so it's hard to believe, but we still see brand new ideas that use mobile or peripherals or technology or just location, all these things in new ways. So just seeing new applications of mobile gets me really excited. But the specific areas in which I think it's really changing the world are in areas of mHealth, in areas of philanthropy, in areas of taking care of kids, in areas where apps are great for businesses and apps are great to help a business connect to their customers. But where we're seeing mobile really change the world, where we're seeing it, we were lucky enough to work on a project that's being driven by the Gates Foundation to use a mobile device to look for malnutrition and look for it at scale in communities and in developing countries. I mean, to me, that's the most exciting thing we have going on in this building, quite frankly. And I think it's some of the most exciting stuff that is going on in tech.